Our presenter today is Carole Stizza, who is no stranger to 40 plus. She's the CEO of Relevant Insight Consulting and Coaching. And by the way, I just love her brand tag: get clear, get recognized, get paid. Carole is a highly sought after speaker, executive leadership coach, senior HR professional, and strength strategy specialist. She's also an author. In fact, this is my opportunity to congratulate Carole on releasing her new book this week, The Ask Framework: Questions that Elevate Your Influence, Performance, and Leadership, which I believe you can find on Amazon. Carole typically helps clients gain clarity on what they want, get recognized for their valued experience, and reap the rewards that are most meaningful to them, including increased influence, life balance, visibility, promotions, and monetary gains. Her topic today is Asking Works. So good morning and welcome back, Carole.
Thank you. I had to get my mute button quick. I have to be quicker at that. So I'm going to share my screen. And by the way, everybody should hear their bio every morning to remind themselves of, what they're showcasing to the world. It's humbling often. Like, oh, okay, live up to that. Woo. So I'm going to share my screen, and this is just a picture of what the book looks like. And it's a COVID baby, an idea that I had 2 years ago, research I'd been doing. I have been able to be a contributing author to 2 other books that sort of prepared me for writing more. But the joke was, can you do your own book? And well, it's out there. So we'll see what the world says. But what I'm talking about today actually came from writing this book. And when I was talking with Milry about what are the concerns that a lot of people have in this organization have right now, well, they're being mirrored in a lot of places. So one of the things that we talked about was, how could I bring the right context? And when we talk about context is extremely important when you're having a conversation. But the things that he brought up were the fact that a lot of us are helping clients that are in the job search, or maybe they're taking this time to self-reflect. I mean, that was kind of, COVID demanded that in a lot of ways for people who weren't chasing small children. And those who were chasing small children did self-reflect whenever they could, stop and breathe. The fact that ageism feels as if it's still really relevant, and ageism is real, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Some people are just asking what's next. A lot of people are like, well, when I get the chance, what's the salary conversation like these days? And some are choosing to look at the gig economy, which is another word for being an entrepreneur, and taking your talents and fine-tuning and focusing on what it is that you absolutely love about what you do and putting it out in the marketplace. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about when I'm addressing these is, today I'm going to be looking at sharing how this concept of asking will fill the tank for information on all of these topics. And so I wanted you to know that all your questions can come from any of these contexts because they are front of mind. But I'm going to talk about ageism real quick, because ageism is so real, because I suffer from it. I get a little ticked off when my millennial children look at me as if the world didn't exist before they were born, and that, they have to teach me something. And I also am guilty of looking at my older in-laws as they start to pontificate on something that I don't think is relevant to the conversation I just started. And I'll have that internal rolling of the eyes. And what that brought forward for me is that if ageism has always been around, when we look to go into a job interview or a client interview, knowing that we may have a visual disconnect between talent and experience, we have to remember that the person wanting to meet us is really interested in, how can I take my talent and bring it to their reality today without patronizing, without saying I know more, or without saying I know less. And so this is where asking better questions gives you the opportunity to open their mind to wanting to know how your experience, how your time and seat can bring relevance to the new technology, the new ideas they feel that they may have originated all on their own, which it's hard to originate new ideas in a lot of ways. But if you recognize the context you're walking into for the conversation, it allows you to concentrate on what to talk about, not how they're going to see you. And that's really important. What versus how becomes something we need to address and stay focused on. So if ageism is real, then that's going to be in the job search. That's going to be part of your self-reflection. That's going to be part of the salary conversation. It's also going to be how you see yourself as an entrepreneur in this gig economy, which COVID has produced more people stepping into this gig economy, which I had to explain that the other day. The gig economy, we used to say, did you get a gig when you're a musician? The gig economy is somebody who has a specialty, who chooses just to finalize the specialty and be hired for just that, to plug in to a system of a project completion. And I have a part-time VA who loves content writing, has a degree in English, and loves research. That's all she does. I can't ask her to, hey, can you step into social media? Hey, can you? No, that is a good example of, I just want to do what I love, what I'm good at, and I'll get paid accordingly. It does bring a different conversation into how to do that, but you first have to decide what to do. So asking works. And here's what I wanted to introduce to this concept. Asking as a line of conversation is very typical for coaches. But when I started asking other people, well, how do you know what other people brag about? What do you feel you're best at on the team? On the last job that you loved, what was your number one talent? They didn't know. And when you don't know, that's what you have to go find out. So we get to become our own little detectives in finding out this information, because it validates what you think. It also will increase your knowledge of yourself in a very rich way. And what I want to do is share that with you today, so that we can actually step into understanding why this is hard and why it'll change everything about the way you see yourself and market yourself. So we wait. And what I mean by that is, when I started looking at research of why people were finding it challenging to go ask for the information that I was asking them for, I wondered myself, why do we not proactively go and seek positive information about ourselves? And what I learned is that it kind of goes back to school. We're taught to listen, learn, and regurgitate. We're not taught to ask questions. And when teaching became even more fundamentally shifted to teaching to the test, we're taught to memorize. We do get to learn, but we weren't taught how to have curious-based conversations. We weren't taught how to make that a complete conversation in a very succinct way, without feeling as if someone made us look weak, without having some emotional baggage to it, without opening ourselves up to information we didn't want. So when I started looking at Harvard's research, and it started with feedback, because I had been in an HR position where I was teaching leaders how to give good feedback, and that's when I got to read the research of like, oh, I've been doing it wrong. Ooh, yay. I learned that the person who holds the most power in any conversation where they're receiving information is the receiver, because they don't have to use the information. They get it, like a quarterback receiving, a ball, but they could fumble it, they could throw it in the trash, or they could throw it. You're assuming that when someone receives information, they know what you want them to do with it. That's not the case. So when I started looking into this research, they started training people on how to go and get the feedback they wanted, when they could use it, when they needed it. And that meant they had to step into asking for it, not waiting to receive it. And that was a big light bulb moment when I was coaching people on how to go position themselves in the best way possible for an interview, for promotion, for getting a new client. Sitting down and how to communicate your value meant you had to go collect your value from how other people had enjoyed working with you, what they bragged about. And that put me on a whole different line of research than I thought I'd ever go on. Then, which led to including research on hostage negotiations. So Chris Voss, who wrote the book Never Split the Difference, he actually went to Harvard to be in the same classroom of the people doing the research on feedback. And collectively, they started to understand how to minimize the drama in any conversation about performance or expectations. So when I started doing, adding Chris Voss's research to what I'm going to share today, it allows you to continue a good conversation when you find out some new information that somebody really has offered and you want to make sure you've captured it all. And I know I'm prefacing this because when I step into the asking conversation, I want you to know where it came from, because it wasn't what I expected to ever write about or know about. Lastly, I do have a master's degree in applied industrial organizational psychology, which is the research of how to help people work better together, which is how I landed myself into HR roles that was helping leaders and teams communicate. I was training, I was helping people onboard, I was helping connect professionals, and communication was always part of that. But communication was where conflict happened the fastest. Whether it was without communication or within communication, there seemed to be an expectation that emotions were included. And leaders wanted to know how to minimize the drama. Teams wanted to know how to minimize the drama, but yet not ignore people's feelings. And this is where this idea of creating a template of questioning that you could respect the other person, but keep it professional without minimizing someone's feelings. And I think that's a real important factor, is we all want to be seen, valued, and heard. And this was a really great way to do it. The best analogy I've ever found to get people to open up is that this bottle, because you can't read your own label from inside your bubble. I'm from Texas, so I use the analogy of salsa. If I told you you were a salsa, you probably could not tell me if you were hot, spicy, mild. Someone would have to read the label, the ingredients, and what someone put on the label to tell you, oh, you're hot, spicy. Ooh, you're sassy. You're mild, smooth, great flavor. This is the same thing. We have to go out and ask what other people see and read on our label after working with us, after getting to see our work, be in a conversation with us, be a client of ours, be on the team we were on, be on the project we were on. And to do that, we kind of don't, because we're taught to wait for compliments, because we put too much of a different value on humility, as if your work should always speak for itself. And at some point, we all have to communicate our value. We're not practiced at it, so we struggle. And this is a way to take back that proactive control and start now. So I use ASK as an acronym because I need you to always stop and breathe before you step into asking any question and clearly articulate the context, because you don't know where the other person's head is at. I probably could ask all of you to pick a meeting you came out of and you asked a question and the other person looked at you like you had three eyes, because somehow they were trying to figure out soccer carpool schedule and you ask them something about the meeting and they have to take a step to go, oh, the meeting. This assigning a context allows you to actually set up the other person for success. It allows you to help them understand you see them. And you can say, hey, about the PowerPoint in the meeting, or you can get more specific, the data that was just presented in the PowerPoint of the meeting. If you start off a conversation with context, it helps the other person quickly step into the right context with you so they don't feel like a dunce or that they were in left field or that you weren't really paying attention to the expression on their face. It automatically supersedes and just puts them in a perfect position to have a better conversation with you. For example, because we're talking about self-reflection and the job search and the ageism and all these other topics, you actually can go to anyone in your family you've worked with and say, hey, on the topic of different generations working at work, or on the topic of working with somebody older than you, or on the topic of working with somebody younger than you, however specific you want to get to this conversation, set the other person up for success so they don't fumble their answer and miss having a better conversation with you. S is for state the one thing or ask the one thing. And there's research behind this, because while we can think about 3 things at one time, we can only focus on one, ever. And our brain is actually conditioned to scan the universe for 2 things. How to be accepted and respected for where we are now, which is why we go to things we like on social media. Oh, that makes me feel good. Or what to learn next. Ooh, I want to know more. What do I learn? How do I do that? And it's always scanning. And I call it love or learn. This is our scanners all the time. And you'll notice there is no space for what's bad, what's negative. And this is why when people say something negative, it's like a marble walking around your head. It just doesn't have a place to go yet. This ask framework I'll share with you. I'll use an example of somebody comes at you with unexpected negative information, and you can control it. You can dissect it, and you can discern if it's gossip or fact. But I'll get to that. But stating or asking for one thing that you want to know helps the other person feel extremely seen in the moment, even though you might be asking information for yourself. This allows the others to offer what's top of mind without confusion. What's the most meaningful? What's your favorite? What's the best? What's the worst? When you ask for the one thing, it literally lets the other person's brain relax. If you say, what is everything you like? Top 5, 10. Whenever you open the conversation up for more than one thing, the problem is you don't get the best information, because we will weigh the multiples equally. Someone says, oh, yesterday's meeting. Well, 1, you were very articulate. 2, you knew your stuff. And 3, that was an awesome tie. You're going to go, should wear that tie more often. You're going to weigh them equally, and you're going to pick which one means the most to you. You've missed the opportunity to have the best information offered to you. So while we are conditioned to make it seem easy by being vague, it complicates the issue. So take the time and practice asking for what's the most meaningful thing I should be looking for. What's the first thing that you feel is necessary for this to be a success? Ask those 1 questions and you will get the best answers right away. The last one is very unique because it causes us to stop and recognize that we all think differently. Having a graduate degree in industrial organizational psychology means I am very familiar with assessments because that's where they came from. How do we assess the gray? The emotions, the personalities, the tendencies, what motivates you, what demotivates you, all of that. And we have found that we can actually scientifically, statistically prove that you are 1 in 476 trillion, which we thankfully do not have that many humans yet. Oh, that would be a problem. So if you're divinely made and you think differently, so does everybody else. So know that everybody thinks differently and ask for an example, meaning ask for how they see things, how they recognize it, how they experience it. So if I were to ask somebody in yesterday's meeting, the data that was provided, what was the most meaningful data that's going to affect our project? And they go, I think it's going to be this. How would that play out? Can you give me an example of how you see that data playing out? That's asking for an example. If you were to go and ask somebody, hey, the last project we worked on 3 years ago, you may not work together anymore. Call them up. The last project we worked on when we worked together, what was the most meaningful thing I added to that team while working with you? And can you give me an example of how you saw that, how you experienced it, or how you experienced the results of us working together? Just that other person feels extremely valued, because now you're asking to see the world through their eyes. You're not telling them what you thought. You're not telling what you think because they don't know to care. You're asking for their input. That one thing that you ask for and then asking for an example, that allows the other person to feel extremely valued by you, even though you're asking information about yourself. That was an interesting phenomenon that as I tested this theory, as other people sat down as leaders and tested it out with their teams, they came back time and time again. That conversation went completely in a different direction than I would have ever bet. I would have never gotten that information on my own. I assumed this. And this is a point to recognize. We place assumptions wherever we lack accurate information. That's a big deal. 100% of the time, we will place assumptions wherever we lack information. And we have a tendency to marginalize what we're familiar with. So we will marginalize our own talents, our own positive effects on other people. And to counterbalance that, you have to ask. Now, where Chris Voss came into this with hostage negotiations is that he learned never to ask why. Because after you get an example of how somebody sees it, and they see it so differently than you ever expected them to see it, a lot of times we want to go, why do you see it that way? That actually makes their brain stop and defend, and we go backwards. Asking why questions makes people defensive, even if they don't say they're defensive. It forces the brain to defend. Chris Voss found that he could actually keep conversations going, which in a lot of cases you're going to want to do here, with what and how questions. And again, we're back to what and how. So if somebody gave you an example of how they saw the results of working with you, you could say, well, if you were to work with me again, what would you hope to see again as we worked? If you were to ask a leader an example of an area that you could grow in, what would that look like to them? How would they recognize it? These what and how questions keep the conversation going that allows you to actually move forward with actionable information. You get to see things in a different way. And this is what feeds the learning part of our brain that allows us to then plug in more where you're accepted and respected in the other part of the brain. And these two parts of the brain produce endorphins that make you feel so much more whole in who you're putting out into the world. So before I stop for a minute and get some questions and start a discussion, I wanted to address the one thing that I brought up before, which is when somebody comes at you unexpectedly with something negative, and we've all had it because we're human, and this is what humans do. In an effort to feel of use and help other people improve, we will lovingly go and say, oh man, if you could just do this, you know, that thing you did back there, if you could just do this. However it comes, whether it's a snarky comment or a helpful but problem comment. If you were to say, hey, can you give, and you can do this backwards. So this is why I call it framework. You can, any part of this framework you can use, you can say, can you give me an example of how you feel that didn't land well for others or for you? Asking for an example, if they can't give you one, then it's gossip. Plain and simple. If it wasn't a firsthand experience, they're passing it along because they've eavesdropped or heard someone else, and that is gossip. And this allows you to ignore it. Or if they say, well, I overheard Sally, then you can go to Sally and say, hey, I just overheard a comment that someone heard that you made, and I'd love to clear it up. Here's the context as the comment. What was the one thing you would have liked seen done differently? That opens up a conversation in a very different way. Nobody's blamed. Nobody takes ownership. Can you give me an example of how you'd like it to be different? How would you see that? What would that do for you? You can take these conversations in a different way. And the reason I use this framework is every bit of research came down to make sure the context is clear. Give the other person an opportunity to be successful by knowing the context and asking for one thing, and do something unique and try and see the world through their eyes by asking an example. Don't make them defensive. Don't ask why, right? And put the what and how questions into motion if you want to see this conversation go further. You don't have to. Whenever you do ask for something positive, like what was the best thing that we did together? What was the number one thing that you feel I bring to the team? When we worked together the last time, what's the one thing you would brag about if somebody asked for a referral? Oftentimes people like the yin and yang approach. Used to be the Oreo approach. We know that doesn't work. Good thing, bad thing, good thing. No, we see it coming a mile away. But somebody's going to say, oh, well, yeah, you did that great, but here's something else you could do. You literally have permission to say, oh, wait, stop right there. Thank you. I only can handle one thing today. But when I'm ready for that, can I come back to you? Oh, yes, yes, sure, yes. Who doesn't like to be helpful and give advice based on their own experience? But you have permission to control that pipeline of information by just saying, I only can handle one thing right now. Thank you. When I'm ready, can I come back? They'll never say no. They won't. So this asking framework is the title, the asking works, is it does. Does it present a few challenges for each of us? Sure. We all have our own little areas we wig out because we get so excited to ask a question, we'll forget to state the context. Or we'll get the answer to the one question and forget to ask an example because we're not used to it. That's fine. Play with this. Get better at it. The more I practice this, even with my family, my sons, my mother-in-law, they don't know I'm practicing some framework, some template. I can go context one thing, example, ooh, what and how question. What they're finding is we have better conversations. And I get more comments walking me like, that was a really cool conversation we had. Thanks for bringing that up. I just asked. I stated a context. I asked for one thing. Then I asked for an example of how they experienced it, how they saw it. And if it was really appropriate, I asked what and how questions. The beautiful thing about taking on this framework is you now have something, a tool in your toolbox to go find out how other people liked working with you so that you understand whether to go out on your own or go back into an organization and a team. You also can walk into an interview and share stories about working with other people, which validates your experience without you having to be a one-off bragger about it. People love hearing stories of real life examples. That's why they ask for in the interview, share with me a time. Knowing how other people have worked with you prepares you more in a better way for the interview. Also, if you decide to work with one-on-one clients, it helps you gain clients because you can communicate your value by sharing stories you've gained by going out and asking. I'm going to come back to this slide and bring it up. But we're going to step into a discussion here and answer a lot of your questions. But I want you to also take a moment. What do you really want to know? This is a really great question when you're going out and you need to either validate that you had an effect, a positive effect. If you want to remind yourself of where to hold on to that confidence and to step into knowing what you're offering. And then list what you really want to know and identify the right people to ask. And just ask them for 15 minutes, whether it's to update your idea of the tools that you still bring to the table, or know and where to learn next, what's competitive now in the field that you love. You know, how would other people consider you to be the best choice for what you love to do? Or to go to people you've worked with on a team and understand how you contributed, because how you contributed is just a piece of the puzzle. You weren't the star attraction. Everybody is a piece of a puzzle. And so I have a PDF I'll offer. It looks like this. We'll come back to it. I'll put it in the chat. But I'm going to come back to this and stop sharing and open it up to questions, see what's in the chat room, and have a discussion about what you would really like to know now as the world's opening back up. Let's see. And what I'd like to know now, depending on where you are, whether you're in a self-reflection mode, if you're eagerly and actively in the job market, if you're wanting to identify your own special expertise for entrepreneurship, what do you really want to know right
now? Here's a question. For those people who, there are introverts and there are extroverts, and it seems on the surface that using the ASK framework might be easier for a person who is an extrovert. How would you have a person who's internally, who internalizes things to step into that mode of operating in an ASK framework, when that might be challenging for them in some ways?
Right. So as a fellow marinator, I marinate. I'm not like, oh, let's just go. The reason I ask, what do you really want to know, is a marinating question. Mm-hmm. So we all have extroversion and introversion within our span of our brain. We extrovert with people that we're really comfortable with. We introvert when we've been challenged. Some people are more introvert, meaning being around people they don't know is exhausting. There are some parts of our people's personalities in the extroversion world where being around people they don't know is energizing. It feeds a curiosity for them. Whether you're an extrovert or introvert, this still is a completely new concept, because if you think back to school, we're taught to learn and regurgitate what we know. So we feel very vulnerable in asking questions. This is a reconditioning of the mind to tap into curiosity, because when you tap into curiosity about what's outside of what you have originated in your own brain, it reduces the anxiety, it reduces the blood pressure, it allows you to think outwardly and be curious. So I'm not asking you to run outside and ask a stranger some random question and use context and one thing and an example. Just take a moment and marinate. What do you really need to know right now? Do you need to hear from somebody you worked with that you had a good relationship for them to articulate and give you an example of why they enjoyed working with you? Then that's the person you contact. So I would recommend for all the extroverts and introverts in the world, go ahead and reach out to them and plan a time, because that's going to instill with you some active thinking. Okay, I'm just going to take 15 minutes. What's the context? What's the one thing I want to ask? And whatever they say, ask for an example. So to answer your question, Milrie, this causes extroverts and introverts to take pause. I'm offering you something new. It's a new perspective. It's a new challenge, but it is the richest of conversations you can have. Start with people you know, your kids, your grown kids, your teenagers. The beauty of getting to practice this for your own sake is you immediately can turn around. And I'll give you an example of how it turned around just in my home. I was starting to ask my family, what's the last vacation we took? That was the context. What was the thing you enjoyed the most? Can you give me an example of how you experienced that? There were things about that vacation I never knew happened. A little disconcerting, but good to know. When I asked we did a family Zoom, and I said, given that we're all together, but we can't be together for Christmas, what was one of your favorite Christmas memories of your entire life? We learned things about the 95-year-old in our family we never knew happened. Even her own daughter was like, I've never heard this story. And asking for an example. Well, give me an example of how you felt during that. That was so rich. Then what I did was when I visited my son, who's a young parent, I was able to say, when I see you with your son, the one thing I notice the most that I love is this. And how I recognize it, how I get to experience is this. And he looked at me and goes, I would have never known that's how you saw me. So when you do get practice at asking using this framework, you can deliver information. You can deliver interesting feedback information, which is how this all started. When I needed to give somebody an area for growth conversation as a leader, I had to say, hey, on the last project you turned in with me, there is one thing I'd like to bring to your attention that is an area of opportunity for you. And it's this. And here's how I recognize that area of opportunity for you, right? So I didn't say it's something you did wrong. Here's an area of, what is it that you hear when I say this? At what question? Here's how I need to see it done differently. And it was a completely professional, drama-free, amazing conversation. Like she goes, I've never had anybody present something that needed correcting in that way. Thank you. So you can turn this around and do it as a delivery system to have better conversations that keep it right up here in a professional way by respecting the other person, letting them feel seen, respected because here's the area of growth, not here's where you screwed up, which is what I really wanted to say, but I didn't. It really changes your ability to lead as well as gain information. So Jennifer said she wasn't able to get on the webinar. If anybody took some notes, would you mind sharing them? Sounded like I missed a great, yes. And if the PDF, just share that. So the PDF I shared is a checklist to get you used to thinking. What's this? What is the context? Because one thing I want to bring to your attention is that when someone comes to you with negative emotions or negative information, it's never about you. You're just there. They're projecting onto you. They want to project it onto you. It's about them. And I want you to hear that so clearly, whether it's a husband, a wife, a son, a daughter, a neighbor, somebody at work. When people come to you like, oh, I can't believe you did anything that has a negative emotion attached to it. It's not about you. It's about them and how they're feeling in that moment. I call it the attempt to hand you a pile of poo. And I want you to take the pile of poo and hand it back and say, wow, it sounds like you're really frustrated. That's the context. What's frustrating you the most about this right now? Still haven't owned it, but I'm not blaming them either. And this is where this allows it to be a neutral emotion zone for you as a receiver of this person in your space. Sounds like you're frustrated. Of course, any negative emotion comes from this lovely hotbed of frustration. What's frustrating you the most allows them to stop and articulate what's really at the core, at least in that moment. There could be more, something deeper, but at that moment, they get space to articulate an emotion without it blowing up further. And then you can say, can you give me an example of how you'd prefer this to be? Can you help me understand how you'd prefer this to be? What's the one thing you want to see happen next? How can we resolve this right now? Any of those. And you've noticed I've just gone through this framework. Truly, truly understand that when someone comes to you and they're upset, it's always about them. Always. Even if it's coming at you. This is not a gift you have to take, like a bad Christmas gift that a relative gives you that you have to open up and go, oh, thanks, this is great. No, you do not have to take this. You can hold on to it and put it right in the middle of the table. It diffuses the emotions for you and them, but you have to take this initiative. And this is a new concept for your brain to know is available to you. I want to give you permission to step into every incident of negative emotions bravely with this tool, because it allows you to calm the chaos even when you feel your own anxiety increasing. So we can all picture a time where we got told we did something wrong. I have been let go at a company that was virtual. The person who let me go didn't know I was going through chemotherapy. So all the HR people don't like go screaming like, you out of it. It was okay. I have been in a performance review where the person doing the review was in front of her boss and wanted it to be about her and not me. That's when I realized that we need to collect information and be able to step in and change the conversation to reflect the purity of the intention of the meeting. If it's a performance review, talk about the value you've added when performing with other people. At some point in our lives, we're going to have to communicate our value in an interview, in a promotion, with a new client. Whatever you decide to do next as the world opens back up, you're going to have to communicate your value. And you're going to have something to communicate, not just something you brought up in your own head that you remember. It's so much easier to tell the story from somebody else's perspective because you're sharing a story that includes others. And it makes other people look equally good, even though you are the focus. What it shows is your ability to see outside of yourself. It shows good leadership and self-reflection and self-awareness. And it shows that you can actually share a story and they start to picture you talking with your new peers, with your new direct team, with their new clients. So there's a lot of research and time that went into this ASK framework. I use it all the time. I advocate that you try and use it. And I'd love to personally hear what was the most challenging for you and what were the rich rewards that came your way that you didn't expect. So I'd like to open it now to just hear what you're thinking at this point and hear what's challenging about this topic. And I'm good at the silence. Go ahead, Katie.
I was trying to raise my hand, but I didn't. I forget how to do that. It's easier for me just to talk. I think I'm at the point of my unemployment life where it's difficult to be positive. It's difficult for me to think I am so stellar, because if I was so stellar, why am I still without a job? So, I mean, by the end of the day, I'm sure I can think of some things, but it's kind of demoralizing to be in this state. So I'm kind of losing faith a little bit. So that's a challenge I'm going through right now.
And you're not alone. I think one thing that COVID and that unemployment, just staying in your own home, feeling isolated, feels as if someone put you there because you didn't qualify to be with others. And that's not true. They haven't seen you as the unicorn they need, truly. One of the things that helps is to look at your resume and go back and make a list of people you worked with when you shared a laugh, when you were on a project, the successes that you experienced. Make a list of those people. Reach out to them and ask for a 15-minute phone call. Just say, I just need you for 15 minutes. I have a question. I'm seeking some information. And let them know I'm reaching out because I'm revising my resume. I'm updating my resume. The world's about to open back up, and I'll talk on that in a moment. And I thought back, you came to mind, and I wanted to talk about the last project or whatever the context is. Be very specific. Set them up for success. Because they're going to go, oh, I don't know. She even asked me for a job. I don't know. Maybe I'm jobless. I don't know. Set them up for success and say, what was the one thing that comes to mind even today that you enjoyed the most about working with me? And can you give me an example of how you saw that, how you experienced it? And see where that goes. And what you're doing is you're asking information that you can put into your superhero file, this bucket that reminds you how valued you still are. If this was last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it doesn't matter. You didn't ditch that side of you. You've added to it, if nothing else. But make a list of these people right now. It's the easiest thing to do. Look at the resume, think back to all the people you worked with, who you shared a laugh with. Even at the water cooler, doesn't matter. They could have been a different department. And you can reach out and say, we worked in the same organization. We didn't get to work directly, but what was the one thing that you heard anybody say that they valued about working with me? It could be something like that if you wanted. Sometimes we work in little silos, or we think we work in little silos, when, again, you were just a piece of the puzzle. So look at the puzzle that you were in and list those people. And it's going to feel really weird. And you're going to pick up the phone and you're going to wig out a little bit, which is why this framework is here. You're going to go context. Okay, remember the context. One thing. I just have to ask one thing, because the first thing you're going to go, how you doing? Tell me about yourself. Blah, blah, blah. And you can do that to a point. Give yourself 2 minutes. That's about the attention span we all have before we really want to change the topic anyway. And say, I want to respect your time. Here's what I need to know today. And let it be that simple. And say, hey, I only asked for 15 minutes. I'm going to cut off at 15 minutes. I'd love to, if they want to connect and go out for drinks, definitely do whatever it is that you want to do outside of that. But keep that phone call to 15 minutes, because that shows them again how professional you are. Don't use it as an excuse to have an hour. They're going to go, oh, it was an hour. If you ask for 15 minutes, take 15 minutes and then end it. Even if they said, no. Say, okay, well, let's book another time in 2 days. But keep it short. Be that beautiful professional you are. Do what you say. Walk the talk. But do this. 10, you could do 3 people, 5 people, 10 people, 15 people, 20 people. Don't let this stop until you have been reminded and re-energized of the value you bring. And what you may find, and this happens 60% of the time, is you may be looking for jobs that pigeonhole you. And by learning how other people have appreciated working with you, it expands your idea of what you want to be doing, which may supersede the title you're assuming you need to be going for. So there's another exercise I want to offer today for people in the Katie camp, because we've all been there. Even if you have a job and you have a bad day, and you're like, why am I here? Why am I still here? Shouldn't I be going for more? I call it the passion.
Carole, before you move on, I see Jean has had his hand up for a couple minutes. Let's see if we can get his question in. Jean, sorry.
Go ahead, John.
That's okay. I think the Carole is sharing a very important message. I think there's a couple of things I wanted to ask. Particularly when you spoke about giving constructive feedback, the way you frame it, I think without going by what's wrong, but why you feel like they could do something differently. And I have two questions. The first one is that how many credence, if I could use that word, do you put in somebody evaluation of you? Meaning, how do you pass out what is personal preference from really what is like a knowledge that will help the recipient of the feedback. And that's question number one. And question number two, and you said, what do you really want to know? And to me, I struggle in very structured interview because I thrive in when it's unstructured. So each time I go into an interview where it's structured, a bomb. So I want to know, because to me, when I want to speak to somebody, that's the question I ask myself. What do they want to know so that I can frame my message? But when they come with the set of a question where they have to go line by line, I'm not quite sure I understand what they want to know. And that's why I don't do well. So I was wondering if you have any thought on that.
Well, let me address your second question first. Structured interviews versus unstructured interviews. You're always going to be approached with either or. And sometimes they combine it. They'll have structured questions that they want to make sure they ask everybody. And then they'll have unstructured parts of that interview where they're really assessing organizational fit. So the structured part is to at least credibly, and this is a legal cover your butt move by a lot of HR departments, is that if they know they've asked everybody the same questions, they can gauge the answers on a balanced playing field theoretically. It's just a cover your butt move. The unstructured part is for organizational fit. How do you talk about yourself? How do you talk about others? How do you relay information? So this ask framework is really designed for you to gather information about how other people have worked with you. I have a different template that helps you kind of craft a better way to share your expertise. Because storytelling is probably the number one way to brag about yourself without bragging. And there's a way to do it that nobody else is really promoting, because they just didn't do the research I did. So to answer your question, to whether it's structured or unstructured, this is why it works for both, so that you don't get wigged out when you've got somebody looking at a line and you're trying to go, what do they want to know? What they want to know is, do they have the experience they say on their resume? Can they communicate that? Do they have more information about themselves? Do they understand what made them successful? And so that's self-reflection and self-awareness. Do they have experience talking with people at the level we need them to talk at? And can they share their expertise without sounding like a braggart, and they have more of an ego than anything else? This is where storytelling becomes your best friend. And the way to share any of your experiences to grab their attention by letting them know where you were when you found out the challenge, stating the challenge very succinctly. Don't go into too many details. They don't know enough to care yet. Give them something to ask about if they do. Talk about the actions, the output of energy that you and others did, not just you, but what you did that allowed others to do stuff, because it allows you to say what you did and how it affected others. Quickly state the result. That just takes 1 minute. The second minute is what that experience taught you. This experience taught me, this experience reminded me, this experience showed me, brought forth my education. But you spend the next minute listing everything that experience has given you, because that's what they're buying. They want to know the experience you had and where it came from. So whether it's a structured interview or an unstructured interview, this could be a whole nother talk with a whole nother PDF and template. But this storytelling will help you relax and share the best of you and not have to try and second guess what they want to hear. Because doing that limits the information you give them, and it limits your visibility in the interview. The first question you had, you might have to restate it for me now, because now I forgot.
Yeah, so the question was that we all get we get feedback from all directions, whether from our family, from our colleague. And I read this book from Ray Dalio that said that he posits that it's good to get feedback, but you can only take in feedback from people that have experience, that have been where you have been, that understand what you do. But in the corporate world, I'm a technical person. That does not imply that my boss will be a technical person. So, and some people like information presented in a particular way. It doesn't mean that the way that you had it was wrong. It's just that that's what they like. Like one of my former boss wanted everything printed and give it to them in paper. Now, to me, I felt like this is a waste of paper, and I could just explain it to you. But okay, but they wanted it in paper in front of them. So my question was, how do you pass out personal preference from value add feedback?
So if I've captured your question correctly, and I'll restate it, when it comes to offering information, how do you offer information that is both, that you've discerned between personal preference, how you like to receive things, how you like to see things, versus professional information? Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah, so I'm thinking I've gotten feedback and I give feedback.
Right.
And I'm very particular also because I have my idiosyncrasy as to, when somebody comes to me with a question, I like them to tell me what they have tried first before asking me what they want to do next. So,
Okay.
So that's my personal preference. It doesn't mean that it's right. It's just that my style.
No. So I'm going to stop there and kind of, it's three parts here. So one is how you like to investigate when someone comes to you with a problem. That's one thing that's come up. The other is how to give feedback that's useful and how to receive feedback to make it useful. So from a technical standpoint, a lot of times when somebody comes to you with a technical issue or feedback about a technical issue, you immediately start to analyze it, take it apart, right? Here's where I encourage you to stop a moment, and when they come to you, and ask them, so give me some context of how you use this, right? It's a lot like unpacking. What'd you try first? If you ask for context, give me some context of where this problem came from or how you found this problem. I was in a meeting, get some context. And then say, what is the most important thing about unpacking this technical issue right now? Because they'll tell you, I want to look good in my job, or this has to happen faster. And then say, tell me, then that's where the example, give me examples of what you tried so far. That's where you're unpacking the problem. But if you ask for the example right up front, what have you tried so far? They're going to be defensive instead of exploratory with you. But if you've asked for context and what's the most important part about getting this solved, it gives you some range of where their emotional attachment is this problem, and then ask for an example of what they've tried so far, they're more open-minded. They've been heard first. Now they're willing to work with you. That's when someone comes to you with a problem. When you have somebody come at you with feedback, like negative feedback, this is not working, you didn't do this right. You still go, well, let's back up a minute, give me some context. You still need it, because then they can paint the picture for you where they were and why this became a problem. Because again, anything negative is about them, not you. They got frustrated. They feel less than. They were in compromised position, whatever. Ask for context. And then say, what's the one thing you want to see happen first? Let's pull that out. And then you can talk through examples of how to do it together, how they would see it, how they'd recognize it, how can you do this? The third time is when you want to give feedback. Someone is screwing up your technical formula. Somebody's not using the technical product right. Whatever it is that you need to professionally go and say, ugh, this needs improving. What you want to do is just yell at them across the room. What you need to do is you need to give them the context first. I need to come and talk to you about this product, this technical whatever. Here's the one thing that keeps coming back to me that seems to be a problem. This is the number one thing that comes back the most. Here's an example of how this could work better. What do I need to communicate to you to make that happen, right? How can we work together so that you're using this correctly? it puts it on a very professional plane and ignores the drama of emotions. And that's what we all aren't as practiced at, because we feel the emotions so intensely first. And that's why this really became very useful in that feedback dynamic. Does that answer all three of your?
It answered beautifully. Thank you.
Good. I saw a chat pop up to put the PDF back there. Somebody else could copy it. I know the scrolling chat room can get ahead of people, but I don't know where that went. Do my answers make sense to everyone? I mean, I'm looking at names, so you know.
Yes, very much.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes,
very-
of course.
Thanks, Abby. Names don't go like this or like this. That's funny. Anybody else, if you wanted to explore more about this?
This is Jennifer Everhart. You mentioned about putting a PDF in the chat box, but your link goes to not a PDF, it goes to the book.
I do have,
Sample the book.
it shouldn't go to the book. I apologize. So let me get,
Thanks.
yeah, I have a wonderful assistant who gives me a list of links. Doesn't mean I know which one. So let me get that for you real quick. And I apologize for the confusion. As I
And
do
then
have it.
I have a question in
Sure.
the chat about getting a deeper dive into your storytelling presentation and the PDF on that topic. And I was also wondering when you might be presenting on that topic in the future.
That's a great question. I haven't been, nothing's on the calendar right now for that. I'm happy to offer it at any time people need it. And I also have a PDF on that I can put in the chat box too. So let me go find both of those and I'll put them in.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Happy to do that.
Carole, one of the most important things I'm taking away is how important it is when you're learning a new skill to practice it amongst people who care about you, who support you, and just give yourself an opportunity to just sort of play with it until you can actually own it. And then you can take it out to a less friendly, more formal environment once you've sort of internalized the process yourself. And
Yes.
by the way, I love the story about your using it in your family and the Christmas situation.
It was
Vacation, I'm sorry.
yeah, it was really, I said, every single time we get together about once a month, I now said, hey, I've got one question about this topic. So, because we have a half a family with very deep introverts and they marinate and they have to be prepared for it. And when I learned that, I was like, oh, okay, I can do this. I can do this. So I do prepare them now. Like, I'm going to talk about this I'm going to ask this question. And so that's been extremely helpful to offer the family. So I just put the Ask Framework checklist up, and I will find the I think I call it Interview Up. Dun-da-da. This is what I'm really grateful for people who set me up for success with my lovely filing system. So I'm going to give you, it's the ebook about this process of storytelling. And it's just an ebook. And so it's got 5 parts, and it can be used for interviewing. It can be used for promoting. I find that it's helpful. And again, practicing sharing your stories with your family. I can guarantee you that they've never heard your stories or your experience this way. For example, when I sat down and I was sitting down with my son, and I said, you're in the interview process. COVID took his job right at the beginning. He was an in-person director of customer service to go in person with all their clients. And in Philadelphia, they shut down first. The headquarters was Atlanta. Atlanta wasn't registering that this was still going to be a thing. and let him go. Like, well, if you can't go to your customers, well, they didn't even try to find him a new role. He was so hurt. He was like, what? And he asked me, Mom, did you ever have an experience where, you were let go? And I go, yeah, I did. I was sitting at my desk. It was working with a virtual consulting firm who I loved. And I got a call. And the guy said, this is not going to be a pleasant call. That's a horrible way to start a call. He did not know I was sitting there with a hat over a bald head and going through chemo. I'd really kept it private. I don't recommend doing that in a work setting, just FYI. And he proceeded to tell me where the challenges were with my work. And what happened was he said, we need to let you go because it's the client's not happy. And that experience really taught me that, one, you should not keep a illness that puts you through a treatment system quiet. You should go to all the top leadership so that they have dispersed this information and ask, so that whether you need help, you're given proxy to ask for it. And all companies you're protected with legal actions. They don't fire you under this type of duress. But I actually was selfishly being private and wanted to keep the job for distraction and keep me focused. I was inappropriately too private because it compromised the client. And I didn't know I could ask for help. I thought it would make me look weak. I learned a lot about how to communicate, what to communicate, why to communicate it. And anytime you're in a treatment program of any type, make that known and be willing to ask for help before you need it so that you can train somebody, you can collaborate and make a team. That experience taught me so much about how to be human and vulnerable in an environment and know your rights, that I now know how to advocate for others. And that was just an example of using this story framework of telling him where I was when it happened, what the challenges, what the results were, and what I learned from it. And he looked at me and goes, I've never heard that story. I did not know they let you go. I thought you let the job go because it was too much on your physical. And I go, no, it's humbling. It's not fun. And it allowed us to talk more about his emotions in that moment that he hadn't brought up, which were priceless. So do practice sharing your experience with family. And you can even say, hey, I'm practicing for upcoming promotion. I'm practicing for an interview. Can I share with you my resume and have you ask me questions and let me see which stories are appropriate to share? I can 100% guarantee you that they have never heard about your work experience the way you need to share these stories. And one of the times that I was helping a client do that, sharing it with a friend, the friend goes, oh my God, I had no idea you had this experience. We have a job for you at my company. So this becomes a good exercise in tapping into your network. Even though you're practicing, they're going to hear you in a way they never knew applied, because you go out for a cocktail, you complain about somebody at work, you might say, this is a good thing that happened at work, but you don't go deep and you don't share. This is a great way to practice and practice with people who know you, because you have no idea how the world is waiting for you to be, and I call it the unicorn because that's what they're looking for. Somebody who fits just perfectly with us, has the skills, has the temperament, likable, whatever, can work well with the person that nobody else in the company can work with. And oftentimes, the only reason you didn't get a job is right behind you came a unicorn that had skills or something they didn't even know they needed. So when you're able to share a story about your experience and you've been able to share stories that highlight you at your best and you don't get the role, please, as easy as it is to take it personally, don't. Because you just have to keep on it. The people who get the job are the people who didn't quit seeking the job, period. And there are days it's hard. So use the ask framework to go be reminded about what people love about you. And then practice sharing your experiences with people who don't know what you do so they can ask you questions that you still might get from an HR person who's supposed to screen you before you talk to somebody who knows what you do. That is still a thing. So I hope that this has been helpful. I'd love to know what has been the most helpful for you today in this session. Thank you, Kirk, for saying optimism has an effective tactic. It's good. And if you don't want to say, if you're busy, feel free to use the chat. Yes, optimism is contagious. Asking better questions. It's interesting, and as people decide to type, when I found out the secret of asking allows the other person to feel more valued, even when you're asking about yourself, that's a gift that you don't realize you can give. I did have someone call me 2 days after I'd had a conversation with them. When I called her and I said, I just need to share something sad. I'm sorry you picked up the phone, but here I need to say something. And they're like, okay, here's the saddest thing that happened today. I'd love to hear if anything like this has ever happened in your life, because I just need to talk. 2 days later, she called me. She goes, you have no idea how depressed I was that day. Thank you for calling and making me feel valued, that I had something to contribute. Please, when you feel your most loneliest, reach out to somebody. It is the antidote that you need. It just doesn't feel easy because you don't want your sadness to be contagious. So if you reach out and say, I need you to be optimistic with me for 5 minutes, they're willing to do it, and it will reward you both. What I love the most about working with groups like this is that we're all willing to learn. And I learned from everybody's story too. John, I really appreciated you presenting the fact that you're technical and how you like to unpack technical. Katie was really great about being vulnerable and saying, this is hard. It is hard. And thank you, Jennifer, for letting me know I didn't have the right link. It's good to be in a group that offers support. And so I hope you practice with each other. I hope you use the ASK framework. I hope you share the storytelling of your experiences. So if there was anything I would ask you today is grab somebody in this group for a half-hour coffee and practice this with each other. Let them hear you. You get to learn something about each other too.